All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are tackling a massive topic, the changing family. We're going to break down everything you need to know, all the key concepts, the big theories, and the evidence to get you totally prepped for that Cambridge O-level sociology exam. So here's what's on the agenda. First, we'll look at marriage and what's happening alongside it. Then we'll dive into who does what inside the family. After that, we'll explore this fascinating idea of childhood and how it's changed. We'll also touch on the changing roles of grandparents. And then, super important, we'll wrap up by showing you exactly how to tackle a classic exam question on all this.
Okay, let's jump right in. First up, marriage and all the different kinds of partnerships that are popping up alongside it. You know, this is a huge social shift, and getting a handle on why it's happening is absolutely key.
First things first, let's get a key term down: cohabitation. I mean, people living together isn't exactly brand new, right? But the fact that it's become so common and so accepted, especially in places like Europe and North America, well, that tells us something really big is changing when it comes to social norms about family.
Okay, so it's not all one thing. Sociologists Fulton and Scott actually broke it down into three main types, which is super helpful. First, you've got these really long-term, permanent relationships. You see this a lot in Sweden. It's basically a marriage, just without the piece of paper. Then there's what they call a trial marriage, which is pretty common in the UK. This is where couples live together to see if they're a good fit before, making it official. And lastly, you have more short-term setups, maybe for convenience, maybe to save money, with no real strings attached for the long haul.
And it's not just about couples. Another massive trend is singlehood. I mean, think about it. With women having more financial independence, and both men and women focusing more on their careers, plus way less social pressure to get married, well, it just makes sense that more and more people are choosing to live alone or maybe with friends instead of pairing up.
Okay, let's talk about lone parent families. You see them a lot more now, right? And that's largely because divorce is more common and there's not the same stigma there used to be about having kids outside of marriage. It's worth noting, though, that for a lot of people, this is a temporary situation. Often that parent will remarry, and that creates what we sociologists call a reconstituted family, or you probably know it as a stepfamily.
And this is where we get into a really important debate in sociology. On one side, you have the new right perspective. They tend to argue that this family type can cause problems for society, linking it to things like kids struggling in school or even crime. But, and this is a big but, other sociologists completely disagree. They push back and say, hang on, the problem isn't the family type itself. They argue the real issues are things like poverty or not having enough support from society.
And rounding out this section, we've got civil partnerships. So originally, these were all about giving same-sex couples the same legal rights as married couples, things like inheritance and pensions. But now it's interesting because in some places, opposite-sex couples can get them too. It's for people who want all the legal protections of marriage, but maybe don't want the traditional or religious feel that comes with it.
Okay, so we've looked at the different shapes families can take. Now, let's zoom in and look at what's actually happening inside the home. We're talking about conjugal roles, fancy sociology term. I know, but it just means the jobs and responsibilities that partners have. Who does the cooking? Who fixes the car? This is a classic topic.
So, sociologists basically see two main types. You've got segregated roles. This is your traditional setup, a really clear divide. The functionalist Talcott Parsons had names for this. The husband has the instrumental role, the breadwinner, and the wife has the expressive role, the emotional support, the homemaker. Then on the complete opposite end, you have joint roles. This is where partners share everything: housework, childcare, even how they spend their free time. It's much more of a team effort. And this idea of sharing leads us straight to a really big theory from Wilmot and Young. They came up with this idea of this symmetrical family. They argued that families were slowly becoming more equal, more balanced. But here's the key thing to remember, and this is super important. Symmetrical does not mean identical. It doesn't mean they both vacuum for exactly 1 hour. It just means their contributions are balanced, they're shared.
And you can see this happening in real life with the rise of the dual-worker family, right? Where both partners have jobs. This is a huge driver of change. Because look, if both people are bringing home a paycheck, it pretty much forces a conversation about who's doing what around the house. The old rules just don't apply anymore.
So what's behind this trend? Well, a few things. For one, nuclear families are more privatized now, a bit cut off from the rest of the community. Plus, with the extended family being less of a big deal, there's less pressure to stick to old-school gender roles.
And probably the biggest reason of all, as women get more education and earn more money, they're just in a much better spot to say, hey, let's make this partnership a bit more equal.
But hold on a second. Not everyone is buying this rosy picture. Feminist sociologists especially are pretty critical. They argue that this whole symmetrical family idea is kind of a myth. They talk about the triple shift, and this is a powerful idea. They say women are often doing 3 jobs: their paid work, most of the housework, and all the emotional work of keeping the family happy and running smoothly.
And this is where you have to look a little closer, you know? The details really matter. So research shows that even when men do pitch in more at home, there's often still a pattern. What kind of jobs are they doing? Often, it's the less frequent stuff, the stuff that's maybe even a bit fun, like DIY or washing the car. Meanwhile, women are still stuck with the daily grind, the cooking, the cleaning, the laundry, the stuff that never, ever ends.
Okay, let's switch gears and talk about kids. But not just kids, the whole idea of childhood. This is where we ask a really deep sociological question. Is childhood just a natural biological stage everyone goes through? Or is it something we, as a society, have kind of made up?
Well, the answer from sociologists is pretty clear. Childhood is socially constructed. What it means to be a child, what you're allowed to do, what's expected of you, has nothing to do with biology. It's all about society, and it changes massively depending on where and when you live.
And here's the proof. The historian Philippe Arius did this incredible work where he argued that back in the Middle Ages, our idea of childhood just didn't exist. Kids were basically mini adults. They worked, they dressed like adults, they were just small people. Now compare that to today's idea of childhood in the West, this special, innocent time where kids need to be protected and looked after. It's a completely different world.
And a huge part of this construction is all about money. Think about it. In the past, kids were an economic asset. They could work, they could bring money into the family. Now, in societies like ours, they are an economic liability, a cost. You've got laws stopping them from working, they have to go to school, and don't even get me started on consumer culture. The toys, the phones, it all adds up. Raising kids has become super, super expensive.
And that leads us to this really important idea of child-centeredness. Basically, it means family life today often revolves around the kids, their needs, their wants, their schedules. And part of the reason for this is that people are having fewer children than they used to. So parents can pour all of their resources, their time, their money, their emotions, into just 1 or 2 kids.
All right, our final section before we get to the exam stuff. Let's talk about another huge change, the role of grandparents. I mean, they've become so important in modern families, and it's all tied to these big demographic shifts happening in society.
I mean, just think about it. People are living so much longer now. That means we have more healthy, active grandparents around than ever before in human history. That's a massive change. For the first time, loads of kids will actually know their grandparents well into their own adult lives. That completely changes how families work.
And what kind of support are we talking about? Well, all kinds. There's money, for sure. They often help out financially. There's the practical stuff. I mean, how many parents rely on grandparents for childcare? It's huge, and it lets so many mothers stay in their jobs. And then there's the emotional support, the advice. There's this incredible bridge between generations.
Okay, deep breath. We've covered a ton of content. Now let's get really practical. We're going to take all that knowledge and apply it. I'm going to walk you through, step by step, how to build a perfect answer for written activity 4.3 from your textbook, the one all about analyzing changing family roles. Right, paragraph 1, conjugal roles. Here's what you do. Start by defining the traditional, segregated roles. If you want to really knock it out of the park, drop in Talcott Parsons' terms, instrumental and expressive roles. Then, you explain the move towards joint roles. This is where you bring in Wilmot and Young and their symmetrical family idea. But, and this is how you get the top marks, you have to add a critique. Bring in the feminist perspective. Argue that maybe things aren't as equal as they seem.
Paragraph 2 is all about the changing role of children. The key here is showing change over time. So you'll contrast the mini-adult from the past, the economic asset, with the modern child. Use those key terms, social construction, child-centeredness. But don't just say it changed, explain why it changed. Talk about new laws, school becoming mandatory, all of that. And for a bonus point to show you're really up to date, you could even mention boomerang children. You know, young adults who move back home after college.
Okay, your third paragraph on grandparents. Your starting point here is demography. Talk about the aging population and how that means grandparents are around and active for much longer. A great term to use is pivot generation. Those people in the middle supporting their kids and their own elderly parents.
And for a brilliant evaluation point, talk about family diversity. What happens with divorce and remarriage? You get new, complex roles like step-grandparents, which really complicates the picture.
And that's a wrap. So we've covered a ton, from alternatives to marriage and who does the dishes, to how we invented childhood and the new vital role of grandparents. And most importantly, you now have a rock-solid plan for your exam answer. So I'll leave you with one final question to chew on. Looking forward, say 20 years from now, which of these changes do you think will end up having the biggest impact on society?